Hey, and welcome to Think Like a Hacker, episode 30. We have a big news item for you today. It's a critical vulnerability in the Ad Inserter plugin, and it's some of our own Sean Murphy's research. So that's breaking news, and then we've got several other stories, some good ones in there, so let's get started. Hey Kathy, how are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you, Mark?
I'm good. A little warm over here, but I am not going to complain. I gather Phoenix is baking right now.
Yeah, don't get me started.
Okay, I won't. I'm not even going to ask what the temperature is. All right, let's dive straight in. So our own, this was Sean Murphy and the threat intelligence team, right, Kathy?
Yeah, Sean led the charge, I believe, and had a few people helping him a bit. But yeah, so we found a critical vulnerability in the Ad Inserter plugin and reported it to the developer last Friday, and our blog post came out earlier this week. Did you check out the blog post, Mark?
Yeah, I did, and it's a really good one, and I actually tweeted a few minutes ago that I love how Sean really just no drama, spelled it out like it is, with kind of the risk rating and so on. Yeah. So what's going on here is that on Friday, July 12th, our threat intel team discovered a vulnerability present in the Ad Inserter plugin. That's a plugin that's installed on over 200,000 websites. Ad Inserter 2.4.21 and below needs to be updated to version 2.4.22 right away. The weakness, so this is kind of a worst case scenario. It's an RCE or remote code execution vulnerability. The weakness allows authenticated users, which are subscribers and above, to execute arbitrary PHP code on websites using the plugin. Now, a lot of sites have open registration, so you can just become a subscriber on that site, and that's what makes this quite serious, is that it allows folks that are essentially just anonymous internet people to potentially execute code on your site. So not good. And Sean has posted in very clear detail, and it's not a crazy long blog post. He's posted on the kind of the details behind this, but there's some interesting stuff in here. So the vulnerability is a good example of why using nonces, if you're a developer, using nonces for authorization is a bad idea. Now, a nonce, if you're non-technical, is basically this one-time number that you get, and you have to give it back to the website if you want to do anything that requires some privileges and so on. Some developers tend to use these as authentication or authorization, and the nonce is designed to prevent some specific attacks, but it's not the way you want to verify that someone is accessing something that they are allowed to access. So Sean explains why that's an issue, but the sort of short version of this is that with this plugin, there was a debug mode, and in that debug mode, you would be able to see the this token, this nonce, that a user would have to give back to the website to perform a sensitive action. And our team discovered that if an attacker submitted a certain cookie, then they would get that debug code even if the site owner has not enabled debugging for the site. And so there's a couple of other interesting twists in the story, so I definitely recommend checking out our blog. But like I said, update to version 2.4.22 right away. As we do with all vulnerabilities, we privately disclosed this issue to the plugin's developer, and the response was just perfect. They released a patch the very next day, and so you can now upgrade to that. And we obviously released the research after they released the patch. So yeah, and then in the Wordfence firewall, we've released a premium firewall rule to protect you against this vulnerability. So if you're on vacation right now and you're not listening to this podcast and you're kind of catching up when you get back, and you're like, oh my goodness, I didn't know about this and I didn't update. Well, we've got you covered if you're running Wordfence Premium. So we've released a firewall rule to protect against this specific exploit. So a pretty good job on the devs part there, Kathy, responding so quickly.
Yeah, definitely. And we do want to mention that if you're running the free version of Wordfence, the community firewall will receive the rule in 30 days. So it's really important if you're using the free firewall and not premium that you update this plugin immediately because you are vulnerable. Yeah,
most definitely. So in other news, this is via ZDNet from July 16th. So that would be today, actually. Kathy, so Google's removing Chrome's built-in XSS protection, eh?
Yeah, it sounds like the cross-site scripting protection was a really great idea, but really inefficient at blocking cross-site scripting attacks and just incredibly difficult to maintain. So this auditor, this XSS auditor, was added to Chrome in 2010 with the release of Google Chrome version 4. It actually scans a website source code looking for patterns that look like cross-site scripting and then block that, either remove the code from the browser or actually blocking that entire website from loading altogether, giving the user an error code that looks something like a server misconfiguration error. But they've decided to remove this. There have been a number of auditor bypasses that have been discovered in the past couple of years, and patching these, actually one of the Chrome engineers said that it put holes in Chrome itself, so it became just incredibly difficult to maintain, and it was creating problems that could provide information leaks, and that fixing all of the information leaks was next to impossible, and it was also having a lot of false positives. So it looks like a situation where software was developed with a lofty goal in mind, but actually reaching that goal became next to impossible. So they have not stated when it will fully be removed from Chrome, but it's going to be replaced by what they're calling the Trusted Types Browser API. Mark, are you familiar with what that is?
No, I'm actually not. You know,
Okay.
I do know that it is an open standard. It's a web standard, and it has a potential to be included in other browsers too. But I haven't dived into the specifics of that. So yeah, I guess we'll see as that emerges, and we'll see if other browser vendors adopt it. But yeah, I think this just became a real pain for a lot of people, and you know, best of intentions there. But kudos to the Chrome team that they acknowledged the reality of the situation and decided to ditch this, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when it becomes just more problematic to maintain that it is, you know, in balance with the benefits that they're trying to provide, and the benefits just aren't outweighing the trauma that they're going through. Time to throw it away and start over, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. Do you mind if I run with this next story? I love this next story.
Isn't this cool? That was cool. So cool.
Yeah. So there's a researcher that discovered a way to bypass Instagram's 2FA, their two-factor authentication, where when you log in, you enter a code that's sent to your phone or to your device. And they were awarded a $30,000 bug bounty from Facebook, which of course owns Instagram. Instagram's mobile recovery flow involved a user receiving a 6-digit passcode to their mobile number for 2FA. And 6 digits gives you 1 million possible combinations, 1 million possible codes. And what the researcher did is they looked at how many code attempts are allowed from a particular IP address. And they figured out that there's about if I recall correctly, 250 attempts were the maximum from an IP address. And so what they did is they figured out that, so just kind of to go to some basic number theory here, if you've got 6 digits, in other words, 0 to 9, the number of possible combinations is 10 to the power of 6, which is 1 million. So they knew that there's 1 million possible combinations, and that seems like a lot, but what they figured out is if they get hold of 5,000 IP addresses, that allows them to make 200 guesses per IP. And so they actually did that, and they proved to Facebook that they could bypass the 2FA using this technique. And this is possible with AWS or Google Cloud, and the cost for 5,000 IP addresses is about $150. So for a very low cost, they demonstrated that they could bypass the 2FA. And there's a couple of issues here. Instagram didn't blacklist the IPs or IP addresses that have exceeded the number of allowed attempts, and so the attacker could cycle through them easily. And I'd say, if you're a developer and you're implementing 2FA, there's a couple things that you can learn from this. So if you're developing 2FA and you're sending a code somewhere, I would recommend that you use alphanumeric, because I mentioned basic number theory. So I'm going to just waffle about that for a couple minutes. So with number theory, you have what's called a base, which is the number of digits in the number system. So with decimal, that'll be 0 to 9. With binary, that'll be 0 and 1. So it's base 2. Decimal is, of course, base 10, because there's 10 possible digits. Hex is 16, and so on. But you can actually determine how many possible values there are for a particular number of digits for any given number system using this, right? So if you are using an alphanumeric code, that would give you letters from A to Z. We'll assume that it's case insensitive. So you just have letters A to Z, so 26 letters plus 0 to 9, so that would be 36. And if you want to calculate how many possible combinations you have, now you say, instead of 10 to the power of, you say 36 to the power of, and if it's 6 digits, 36 to the power of 6. And so in that case, 36 to the power of 6 is a little over 2 billion possible combinations. So if Instagram, when they implemented this, if they'd simply used an alphanumeric code, it would have the attacker would have had to make over 2 billion guesses, which of course would not be feasible, one hopes, unless AWS has grown very big. But that's kind of the basics around here. So when you're developing 2FA, you want to use you're kind of like inventing your own number system, right? So if you're using alphanumeric, you've got a number system that is the letters A to Z and 0 to 9. So 36 possible values, and if it's case sensitive, now you've got 26 plus 10. If you're still using numbers, and you can go even beyond that. You've got other characters in there and so on, but you also want to make sure that it's user friendly, and just making it alphanumeric is just a killer improvement when you're implementing this stuff. So I kind of wanted to share that with the devs that are listening here. And then the other thing is that I think one of the weaknesses here is that Instagram was not tracking attempts across IP addresses. They were tracking on a per IP address basis. And so if they looked at the number of 2FA guesses for a particular account, well, they would have noticed that this attacker is making a million guesses, or probably didn't require a million guesses to guess the right code. So a few 100,000 guesses for that account, but instead I think they were tracking it per IP address. And so you want to kind of centralize that and have that on a per account basis rather than per attacker, per IP, and so on. So I think there's some lessons here. If you are thinking like a hacker and you're developing this stuff, that's probably a few good takeaways there. Don't you think, Kathy?
Yeah, definitely. I was really impressed with the fact that there was a bug bounty, and that Instagram and Facebook responded so quickly to this report that the security researcher had provided to them. And it just makes me happy to see large companies like this that have so much user data in sort of their world that they need to protect, just responding to security alerts very quickly. That's heartening.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the budget here, or the reward here for this bug bounty was $30,000, which is it's significant, because I think this is, this researcher is probably going to find a handful of these, maybe one, maybe two, maybe three vulnerabilities like this per year. And so the sort of level of bounty begins to allow a researcher to make a living doing this, which is good. It's good for the entire online community. So I really like that too.
Yeah, excellent.
So Gutenberg, some news in that space, huh?
Yeah, well, Gutenberg came out in December, right before WordCamp US in Nashville, and there was, some consternation amongst a number of people who were just not ready. So Gutenberg 6.1 it was released on July 10th, and it's minor improvements, but what you can tell from the improvements that they are making, that they are small improvements. You know, it was kind of like, you know, a Band-Aid was ripped off when Gutenberg was launched, and a lot of people were like, you know, shocked at this large change. But as Gutenberg is sort of out in the wild, all of these small improvements, and I use Gutenberg on a number of sites, and I'm watching just how it's maturing, and it's not like large movement anymore. Now it is small, minor improvements that are just in very subtle ways making the experience of using the Gutenberg editor much better. So in 6.1, we're seeing that typing is 30% faster, and I think the greatest benefit with this minor improvement was the introduction of motion and animation to sort of give feedback to the end user that is using Gutenberg as an editor to let them know that changes are occurring. There's also little notices when people are copying all content, and REST API error messages are now being showed as notices. It's minor adjustments, but it's great to see that the editor is sort of maturing as it's being used in WordPress installations worldwide.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. So to see it stabilizing, maturing like that.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Cool. So so this is a bit of a hardcore story. Hackers made an app that kills to prove a point. So there's a medical device that is completely insecure, and it's really an insulin pump, and it had a feature that allows a doctor to interact with this device using a remote control. And hackers figured out a way to send commands to the device. And Kathy, I see your note in here, hubris, thy name is Medtronic.
just a little bit. So, this was 2 years ago, right, that they disclosed this? And
Right. So Billy Rios and Jonathan Butts from QED Security Solutions discovered these vulnerabilities in Medtronic's popular MiniMed and MiniMed Paradigm insulin pumps lines 2 years ago. They first raised awareness about this issue in 2018 with a widely publicized talk at Black Hat Security Conference in Las Vegas. An attacker could remotely target these pumps to withhold insulin from patients or to trigger a potentially lethal overdose. Medtronic did nothing. The FDA alerted customers. Medtronic didn't alert until March 2019, so this year. And so the researchers resorted to drastic measures, and what they ended up doing is they built an Android app that could use these flaws to basically kill people. They created a universal remote. They essentially created a universal remote for every one of these insulin pumps in the world. And when they're doing this research, it was relatively easy to determine the radio frequencies on which the remote and pump were talking to each other. They figured out that communications are not encrypted. It was pretty easy to reverse engineer, and the encoding and the validity checks meant to protect the signal. And after establishing initial contact, the hackers can then control the radio through a simple smartphone app to launch attacks, similar to apps that can fill in for your TV remote. So the attacker would need to know the serial number, but they brute forced that. And there's an interesting side fact here, and it just goes to illustrate the complexity when it comes to fixing some of these issues. So there's a newer pump available now, and the hackable pump is kind of the older version, but these older pumps are actually prized by certain customers. They use it for something that's not approved by the FDA. What they do is they connect the pump to a continuous glucose monitor that's embedded under the skin, which then tells the pump when to release insulin. So there's this sort of loop that exists. The monitor detects the glucose level, sends a signal to the pump to release insulin, which affects the level of glucose in the blood. I'm out of my depth here a little bit in terms of how insulin affects glucose, but then presumably the glucose monitor will send another signal if more insulin needs to be released. And so these customers are basically hacking these old pumps to do this, to interact with the glucose monitor in this non-FDA approved way. And so recalling the hackable pumps has been complicated by this. Now the FDA is actually working to make that loop system approved. But I just thought that was really interesting. So, in terms of lessons here, if you're developing these kinds of medical devices, it, obviously pays to think like a hacker and basically look at your medical device and say, if I wanted to kill this patient, how would I do it? Or at the very least, I would say that if you, tell your QA team to go through that thought process. And I think this will lead developers away from creating open and unencrypted RF communications with critical medical devices, which is what happened here. Pretty scary one, hey, Kathy?
Yeah, it's really scary. Have you seen this HBO documentary called Out for Blood about Theranos, the Silicon Valley?
And it's brilliant. And I've read the book about their adventures too, and it's crazy. What a toxic work culture, but that's a total tangent.
Totally, but the thing that really got me thinking, and as I was reading this article and thinking about to that documentary, the intersection of technology and medicine, and how the margin of error just is so minute because people's lives are on the line if you make a mistake, if something doesn't go as planned, if there's a bug, if there's a vulnerability. So it's kind of like this brave new world of technology in medicine. Yeah,
no, for sure. All right, and then in a side note, we've got there's an article that Brian Krebs has written on his website, Krebs on Security. And if you're in cybersecurity, I'm sure you know Krebs very well. He does some really great research, but he's written a post on one of the world's biggest Bulletproof hosters. Now, as a reminder, a Bulletproof host is a hosting provider that will host illegal things and won't respond to takedown requests. And so Brian went in and did some research looking at who's actually behind this Bulletproof host, and he's got a really good blog post about that. If you're interested in doing that kind of research and identifying specific threat actors, I'd definitely recommend that you go and take a look at his post, and we'll include that in the show notes. And then Kathy, the Agent Smith malware, I'm a huge Matrix fan, so I love the name there. But it looks like that infected 25 million Android devices, yeah?
Yeah, that's what it looks like. It looks like most of the malicious apps or games distributed through third-party app stores by a Chinese group. 300,000 of these devices were infected in the United States. And the thing that kind of creeped me out, because it is like Agent Smith. I mean, in the Matrix, what did Agent Smith do? He took the form of other beings within the Matrix, so to speak. And that's exactly what this malware was doing. So this malware would basically take, say, for example, you have WhatsApp or the Opera browser on your Android device. It basically would take the form of that app and then become like the malicious version of WhatsApp. So it's actually malware. It's Agent Smith. It's malware on your device. And this was using a vulnerability in the way that Google apps were updated. And the hijacked apps would still work just fine. So a user would not know that this Agent Smith app or malware had taken over the app that they were using. But armed with all the permissions the user had granted to the original real app, Agent Smith was then able to hijack other apps on the phone and display unwanted ads to users. The scary thing is that a lot of people use their phones for banking, shopping, and other sensitive apps, and the user would not see any difference whatsoever, but the attacker could connect possibly to your bank account remotely. So this was definitely a frightening piece of malware that was showing up on these 25 million Android devices. Why do you think that it got so pervasive?
I don't know. I guess successful attackers, do you have any theories?
People don't update their apps. That's my best guess. From reading this article on phys.org, they made some connections with the fact that because Google, when Google issues a security fix or patch, every device maker, such as Samsung or LG, then they have to make sure that all of their own apps are working with that new system, and it takes some time. So users are slower to update their operating system as well as their apps, and that could be the cause of this being so pervasive, because 25 million devices that's a lot of
huge attack surface.
Yeah.
Very attractive attack surface if you're a threat actor, eh?
It definitely is.
So in an update to this, one of the stories we did last week, we mentioned there was a Zoom vulnerability, and what was going on there is, the sort of most interesting part about that was that an attack or a researcher discovered a way to invite someone to a Zoom conference and automatically turn their camera on, which I think opened up a few interesting possibilities there. But there were a few other weird things with Zoom, and one of them was that when Zoom installed, it would also install a hidden web server that's listening on your machine's network interface. And even once you removed Zoom, the web server was still there, and an application or Zoom themselves could send requests to that web server and it would reinstall the Zoom software. And so there was obviously some security issues around that, but one of the challenges for Zoom is that once this was disclosed, they were trying to fix it, and folks that had already removed the Zoom main application, Zoom did not have the ability to remove the web server for them because those users were no longer running any of Zoom's software. And so they collaborated with Apple, and Apple sent out a silent update to Macs that would automatically remove Zoom software, and that includes the web server. And this actually affected Ring Central and Zoomoo as well, which are running white-labeled versions of Zoom. So Apple sent out an update on July 10th and another update on July 16th to remove the software. And I'll just go back to, if you're a developer or a vendor, what you can learn from this. And I think that if you're a developer, consider whether what you're doing is ethical. If it feels a little weird, that's okay. Just pause, think it through, and consider whether you should actually be doing that. And I think leaving a web server running that can automatically reinstall your software is not ethical. And then when a user uninstalls your software, it should be completely removed. There shouldn't be some sort of lingering element there that can be used to take action on that machine in future. And then I think get your QA team to think like a hacker. Have them try to use your software for malicious purposes. And then I think think about the other scenarios, right? So if a user has uninstalled your software and you need to help them remove the web server that you've kind of surreptitiously installed in the background, Zoom didn't have the ability to do that, and so that was a real problem for them. So they obviously didn't think that through. So nice to see that one resolved, Kathy?
Yeah, it definitely was. So many people use Zoom just to connect with, especially remote work and being able to just leverage video technology across so many different continents and whatnot. It's the only one that really works. So I'm really glad that that these vulnerabilities are getting patched, and hoping that Zoom takes a deeper look at the features that they're trying to give to these users, and not trying to circumvent security best practices in order to do them.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, thanks, Kathy. That's it for this week's news. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like or subscribe if you haven't already subscribed to our feed there. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, definitely give us a rating and let us know how we're doing. And we'll be airing our interview later this week, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching or listening, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye, everyone.